Marcus Wellington stepped out of his black Bentley, adjusting his expensive watch as he gazed up at the mansion he hadn't seen in 3 years. The sprawling estate looked exactly as he remembered it, with its white columns and perfectly manicured gardens. But something felt different. There was life here now, sounds of laughter echoing from somewhere inside the house that had been silent when he left. His business empire had consumed every moment of his life since the divorce. Deals in Tokyo, meetings in London, conferences in Dubai. The success had been worth it, or so he told himself. His company was now valued at over $2 billion, making him one of the youngest billionaires in the country. But standing here now, looking at the home he'd abandoned in his pursuit of wealth, Marcus felt an unexpected hollow sensation in his chest. He walked slowly toward the front door, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble steps. Through the tall windows, he could see movement inside. His ex-wife had moved out long ago, taking their settlement and starting a new life in California. The house was supposed to be empty, maintained only by the property management company he paid to keep it in perfect condition. As Marcus reached for the ornate door handle, he paused. Children's voices carried through the air, high-pitched and joyful. One voice stood out above the others, warm and melodic, clearly an adult woman speaking in gentle, patient tones. His hand froze on the handle. Who could possibly be inside his house? The security system hadn't alerted him to any intrusion. His phone would have received notifications if anyone had entered without authorization. Marcus pulled out his cell phone and checked the app connected to his home security cameras. Everything showed normal status. No alerts, no warnings, no indication that anyone was inside. He turned the handle and stepped inside, immediately struck by how different everything felt. The cold, sterile atmosphere he remembered was gone. The air smelled like fresh cookies and something floral, perhaps lavender. Sunlight streamed through windows that had always been covered by heavy drapes during his marriage. The marble floors gleamed, but they were scattered with colorful toys and children's books. Marcus stood in his own foyer, feeling like a stranger. The house felt alive in a way it never had when he lived here with his ex-wife. Their marriage had been a business arrangement more than anything else, two ambitious people who thought they could build an empire together. But empires, Marcus was learning, were cold places to live. "Tommy, don't run in the house with your muddy shoes," came that same warm voice from deeper in the mansion. Marcus followed the sound, his confusion growing with each step. The voice had a slight accent, something he couldn't quite place. Caribbean, maybe, or African. It was soothing and musical, the kind of voice that made you want to keep listening. He passed the formal dining room, where he noticed the long mahogany table was covered with art supplies. Finger paintings were spread out to dry, depicting stick figures under bright yellow suns. Crayons were scattered across the surface along with sheets of construction paper cut into various shapes. This was not how his dining room had ever looked. Marcus continued toward the kitchen, where the voices seemed to be coming from. His heart rate increased with each step. If someone had broken into his house with children, what was their intention? Were they homeless people seeking shelter? Was this some kind of elaborate scheme? His mind raced through possibilities, none of them making complete sense. As he approached the kitchen doorway, Marcus could hear the woman more clearly. She was humming something while apparently cooking, occasionally speaking to the children in that same patient, loving tone he'd noticed before. One of the children, a young boy by the sound of his voice, was asking excited questions about what they were making for dinner. Marcus paused just outside the kitchen entrance, gathering himself before confronting whoever was inside his home. He straightened his tie and prepared to demand an explanation for this invasion of his property. But nothing could have prepared him for what he saw when he stepped into the doorway. A tall, elegant black woman stood at his kitchen island, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore simple jeans and a white blouse, both clean but clearly not expensive. Her hands moved gracefully as she chopped vegetables for what appeared to be a home-cooked meal. The kitchen, which had always felt too large and impersonal, somehow seemed perfectly sized around her presence. But it wasn't the woman who made Marcus freeze in complete shock. It was the three children sitting around the kitchen island, each holding small cups of what looked like fresh orange juice. Two boys and a girl, all appearing to be between the ages of 6 and 10. And every single one of them had Marcus's unmistakable green eyes and the same distinctive cleft in their chin that he'd inherited from his father. The woman looked up as she sensed someone in the doorway. Her eyes met Marcus's, and for a moment, neither of them moved. She didn't seem surprised to see him, which only added to his confusion. Instead, her expression showed something between resignation and determination, as if she'd been expecting this moment for a long time. The children followed her gaze and turned to look at the stranger who had appeared in their kitchen. The youngest, a girl who couldn't have been more than 6, tilted her head curiously. "Mama Grace, who is that man?" she asked innocently. Marcus felt the world spinning around him. Mama Grace. These children called this woman Mama Grace, and they were clearly, undeniably his children. The resemblance was too strong to deny. The boy who looked to be the oldest had Marcus's exact nose. The middle child, another boy, had his father's distinctive eyebrows. And the little girl had the same green eyes that Marcus saw in the mirror every morning. "Children," Grace said quietly, her voice steady despite the tension Marcus could see in her shoulders. "This is Marcus Wellington. He owns this house." She paused, glancing back at Marcus with an expression he couldn't read. "He's your father." The simple words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "Your father." He gripped the doorframe to steady himself, his mind struggling to process what was happening. He had children, 3 children, living in his house with a woman he'd never met before this moment. How was this possible? When had this happened? Why had no one told him? The oldest boy, who looked to be about 9 or 10, studied Marcus with intelligent eyes that were mirror images of his own. "You really are Dad?" he asked, his voice carrying a mixture of curiosity and something that might have been hope. "Grace told us about you, but we've never seen you before." Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He stared at this child who was undeniably his son, trying to understand how his entire world had just changed in the space of 30 seconds. The boy was well-fed, clean, and clearly happy. His clothes were simple but neat, and he spoke with confidence and good manners. Someone had been raising him well. The middle child, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, slipped down from his chair and took a few steps toward Marcus. "Are you going to stay for dinner?" he asked with the easy trust that only young children possess. "Grace makes really good chicken and rice. It's my favorite." Marcus looked back at Grace, who was watching this interaction with careful eyes. She hadn't moved from behind the kitchen island, but Marcus could see her hands were trembling slightly as she continued holding the knife she'd been using to chop vegetables. Despite her calm exterior, she was nervous about his presence here. "How long have you been living in my house?" Marcus finally managed to ask, his voice sounding strange and distant to his own ears. Grace lifted her chin slightly, meeting his gaze directly. 2.5 years, she said simply, "since the children needed a home, and this house needed a family." The words were spoken without apology or explanation, as if the arrangement made perfect sense. Marcus felt his business instincts kicking in, the part of his mind that was trained to analyze situations and identify problems that needed solving. But this wasn't a business deal or a corporate merger. This was something far more complex and personal than anything he'd ever encountered in his professional life. "We should talk," Marcus said, glancing meaningfully at the children who were still watching this exchange with fascination. Grace nodded and turned to the 3 young faces looking between the adults with growing awareness that something important was happening. "Tommy, David, Sarah," she said gently, "why don't you go wash your hands and get ready for dinner? I'll call you when everything is ready." The children obeyed without argument, but Marcus noticed they each hugged Grace before leaving the kitchen. Not quick, obligatory hugs, but real embraces full of genuine affection. The little girl, Sarah, whispered something in Grace's ear that made the woman smile despite the tension in the room. When they were alone, Marcus and Grace faced each other across the kitchen island that had become the center of a life Marcus never knew existed. He had 1,000 questions, but only one seemed important enough to ask first. Are they really mine? Grace's expression didn't change, but Marcus saw something flicker in her dark brown eyes. Pain, perhaps, or disappointment. She set down the knife she'd been holding and wiped her hands on a dish towel before answering. Yes, Marcus, they're yours. Her voice carried a weight that suggested there was much more to this story. Tommy is 9, David is 7, and Sarah just turned 6 last month. We had a small party here in the backyard. She asked if her daddy would come, and I had to tell her I didn't know where you were. Marcus felt each word like a physical blow. His children had been living in his house, growing up without him, celebrating birthdays while he was closing deals in boardrooms around the world. The little girl had asked for him at her 6th birthday party, and he hadn't even known she existed. I don't understand any of this, Marcus said, moving closer to the island but still maintaining distance. Who are you? How did you end up here with my children? And why didn't anyone tell me I had children? Grace pulled out her phone and placed it on the counter between them. The screen showed a photo that made Marcus's breath catch. A woman with dark hair and a beautiful smile holding a newborn baby. The woman was clearly mixed race, with features that seemed familiar, but that Marcus couldn't quite place. This is Elena Martinez, Grace said quietly. Do you remember her? The name hit Marcus like lightning. Elena, the hotel in Miami, 3.5 years ago. A conference that had run late, a bar where he'd gone to unwind, and a woman whose laugh had drawn his attention from across the room. They'd talked for hours about everything and nothing. She was a teacher, he remembered now, visiting Miami for some educational conference. Intelligent, funny, beautiful in a natural way that was so different from the polished women in his usual social circle. They'd spent 3 days together before Marcus had to fly to Singapore for another deal. Elena had given him her number, and he'd promised a call. But Singapore had led to another opportunity in Hong Kong, which had led to a merger possibility in Germany. Weeks had passed, then months, and the memory of Elena had been buried under the avalanche of his ambition. She tried to contact you, Grace continued, watching Marcus's face carefully. Called your office multiple times. Your assistant said you were traveling and would call back when you had time. Elena waited for 2 months before she stopped trying. Marcus sat down heavily on one of the kitchen stools, the weight of realization crushing down on him. She was pregnant. She was pregnant with Tommy, Grace confirmed. Elena was my younger sister. When she found out she was having a baby, she was scared but excited. She kept believing you would call back, that you would want to be part of your child's life. Even after Tommy was born, she would sometimes check her phone, hoping. The past tense wasn't lost on Marcus. Where's Elena now? Grace's voice became softer, more careful. Elena died 18 months ago. Car accident on her way home from work. She was a single mother working 2 jobs to support Tommy and save money for his college. She never asked you for anything, never tried to sue you for support. She was proud, and she wanted to raise her son on her own terms. Marcus closed his eyes, tried to process the information. But there are 3 children. After Tommy, Elena met someone. A good man named Carlos who loved her and accepted Tommy as his own son. They had David together, and then Sarah. But Carlos was deployed overseas with the military when Elena died. He was killed in action 4 months later. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of children's laughter coming from somewhere else in the house. Marcus struggled to understand how his life had become so complicated in the span of a single conversation. 3 children, a sister dead, a stepfather killed in military service, and a woman he'd never met who had somehow become responsible for all of them. So you're their aunt, Marcus said. I'm their guardian, Grace corrected. Elena named me in her will. Carlos did the same before his deployment. The children had nowhere else to go. Marcus looked around the kitchen, really seeing it for the first time. This wasn't the sterile, rarely used space he remembered from his marriage. Someone had made it a home. There were children's drawings held to the refrigerator with colorful magnets. A chore chart was posted on one wall, showing daily tasks assigned to each child. Fresh flowers sat in a simple vase on the windowsill. "You've been living here for 2.5 years," Marcus said. "How did you even get inside?" For the first time since he'd arrived, Grace smiled slightly. "Elena kept the key you gave her during those 3 days in Miami. She said you told her she should visit sometime, see your house. She never did, obviously, but she kept the key as a reminder of what she thought might have been." Marcus remembered giving Elena the key. It had been a grand gesture during those magical 3 days when everything seemed possible. He'd been caught up in the romance of the moment, making promises he'd never intended to keep. The key had been symbolic more than practical, but Elena had taken it seriously. When the children's temporary foster placement fell through, Grace continued, "I was desperate. I'm a teacher, but my salary wasn't enough to support 3 children in a rental that would take all of us. I remembered Elena telling me about the key and this house. I drove here one night just to see it. The property management company sign was out front, but when I called, they said the house was owned by someone who never visited." "So you just moved in?" Marcus asked, though his tone was more curious than accusatory. "I researched you first," Grace said firmly. "Found out about your business empire, your travels, your divorce. It was clear you hadn't been here in years and probably wouldn't be back anytime soon. The children needed stability, and this house needed people who would care for it properly. It seemed like a solution that could work for everyone." Marcus stood up and walked to the window that overlooked the backyard. Through the glass, he could see evidence of the children's presence everywhere. A swing set that definitely hadn't been there before. A vegetable garden with neat rows of plants. Bicycles parked near what used to be his seldom-used outdoor entertaining area. "You've been squatting in my house for 2.5 years, raising children I didn't know existed, and no one thought to inform me." Grace's voice became sharper. "I left messages with your office 6 months ago when Sarah needed surgery for her appendix. I thought her biological father should know his daughter was in the hospital. Your assistant said you were in closed-door negotiations for some major acquisition and couldn't be disturbed by personal matters." The word stung because Marcus could imagine exactly how his assistant would have handled such a call. He'd trained his staff to protect his time ruthlessly, to filter out anything that might distract from the business at hand. Personal matters were exactly the kind of interruption he'd instructed them to deflect. "What about legal custody? Child services? How have you managed to keep 3 children here without anyone questioning the arrangement?" "The children are legally mine," Grace said simply. "Elena's was processed through the courts. Carlos signed papers before his deployment, giving me guardianship of David and Sarah if anything happened to him. As far as the legal system is concerned, I'm their parent now. The fact that Tommy's biological father was never involved in his life just made the paperwork simpler." Marcus turned back from the window to find Grace watching him carefully. There was steel in her gaze, the look of someone who had made difficult decisions and was prepared to defend them. She wasn't apologetic about the choices she'd made, and Marcus found himself respecting that even as his mind reeled from the implications. "The house is maintained better now than it ever was when I lived here," Marcus admitted. "The property management company sends me reports every quarter, and they've been glowing for the past 2 years. That's because someone lives here who actually cares about it," Grace said. "Children need stability, and this house gives them that. They have friends in the neighborhood now, attend the local school, play in the community soccer league. This isn't just shelter for them anymore. It's home." The sound of footsteps running down the hallway announced the children's return. Tommy appeared in the doorway first, his hair damp from washing his hands and face. David and Sarah followed close behind, both of them eyeing Marcus with the curious intensity that children reserve for new and potentially interesting adults. "Can we eat now, Grace?" Sarah asked, climbing back onto her stool at the kitchen island. "I'm really hungry, and everything smells so good." Grace looked at Marcus questioningly, and he realized she was asking if he planned to stay for dinner. The thought terrified and intrigue him in equal measure. An hour ago, his biggest concern had been whether the merger his team was negotiating in Switzerland was progressing according to schedule. Now he was facing a decision about having dinner with 3 children who shared his DNA, but were complete strangers to him. "Please stay," Tommy said suddenly, his voice carrying a hopeful note that made Marcus's chest tighten. "Grace always makes enough food for extra people. She says you never know when someone might need a place at the table." Marcus looked at this boy who was his son, this child who had lived 9 years without knowing his father, but was generous enough to invite him to stay for a meal in what should have been Marcus's own house. The irony wasn't lost on him. He owned this mansion, but these children had made it a home he was now being invited to share. "I like that very much," Marcus said, surprised by how much he meant it. Dinner was unlike any meal Marcus had eaten in years. The dining room he remembered as a formal, intimidating space had been transformed into something warm and welcoming. Grace had moved the children's art supplies to make room for play settings, but evidence of their creativity remained in the colorful drawings taped to the walls and the small handmade centerpiece that Sarah had apparently crafted from flowers picked in a backyard garden. Grace served chicken seasoned with herbs Marcus didn't recognize, rice with vegetables, and fresh bread that filled the air with a heavenly aroma. Everything was prepared from scratch, the kind of home cooking Marcus hadn't experienced since his childhood visits to his grandmother's house. His adult life had been filled with restaurant meals, catered events, and rushed snacks eaten between meetings. "Grace grows the vegetables herself," David explained proudly as he helped pass dishes around the table. "She taught me how to plant tomatoes, and I helped her make this dinner. The herbs come from our garden, too." Our garden. The possessive pronoun struck Marcus as significant. These children had claimed ownership of his property in a way he never had. During his marriage, the house had been a showpiece, maintained by professional staff, and rarely used for actual living. Now it pulsed with the energy of a real family. "Tell me about school," Marcus said, addressing all 3 children but looking particularly at Tommy, his oldest son. "What grade are you in?" Tommy straightened up with pride. "I'm in 4th grade, and I'm in the advanced reading program. My teacher says I read at a 7th grade level. Grace helps me with my homework every night, and we go to the library every Saturday to get new books." "What kind of books do you like?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. "Adventure stories mostly, and books about science. I want to be a marine biologist when I grow up and study sharks. Did you know that some sharks can live for over 400 years? The Greenland shark is older than the United States." Marcus found himself smiling at his son's enthusiasm. "I didn't know that. That's fascinating." David bounced in his chair, eager to contribute to the conversation. "I'm in 2nd grade, and I like math the best. Grace taught me how to do multiplication, even though we're not supposed to learn that until 3rd grade. Want to see?" Without waiting for an answer, David began reciting multiplication tables with the speed and accuracy of someone who genuinely enjoyed the challenge. Sarah, not to be outdone by her brothers, announced, "I'm in 1st grade, and I can read chapter books now. Grace reads with me every night before bed. Tonight we're going to read about a princess who saves her kingdom by being really smart instead of waiting for a prince to help her." Marcus looked at Grace, who had been quietly observing the interaction while encouraging the children to engage with their father. "You're a teacher," he said, remembering what she'd told him about her profession. "Elementary education," Grace confirmed. "I teach 3rd grade at the local public school. It's the same school the children attend, which makes logistics much easier. I can keep an eye on them during the day and help with their homework in the evenings." "Do you enjoy teaching?" Grace's face lit up in a way that transformed her entire appearance. "I love it. Working with children, watching them discover new ideas, and develop confidence in their abilities. Every day brings something unexpected and wonderful." Marcus realized he couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken about their work with such genuine passion. In his business circles, people talked about deals and profits and market positions. But Grace talked about her job the way people discuss their calling, their purpose in life. "What about you?" Tommy asked suddenly. What kind of work do you do? The question was so straightforward, yet Marcus found himself struggling to answer. How did he explain international business acquisitions and complex financial instruments to a 9-year-old? How did he describe the satisfaction of closing a billion-dollar deal to children who measured success in good grades and successful tomato plants? I own companies, Marcus said finally. I help businesses grow and become more successful. Do you like it? Sarah asked with the direct curiosity that only young children possess. Marcus paused, considering the question. Did he like his work? It had consumed his life for years, driven every decision he made, justified every sacrifice he demanded of himself and others. But did he actually enjoy it? It's challenging, he said carefully. I'm good at it, and it's allowed me to be very successful. But do you like it? Sarah persisted, clearly not satisfied with his diplomatic answer. Grace intervened gently. Sarah, sometimes adults have complicated feelings about their work. It's not always as simple as like or don't like. But Marcus found himself wanting to answer honestly. These children deserve truthfulness, not corporate speak. I used to think I loved it, he said slowly. But sitting here with all of you, I'm realizing that success and happiness aren't always the same thing. The conversation continued throughout dinner, covering everything from favorite movies to dreams for the future. Marcus learned that David wanted to be a chef like Grace, that Sarah hoped to become a veterinarian who specialized in helping injured animals, and that all 3 children were learning Spanish because Grace thought it was important to speak more than one language. When the meal was finished, the children automatically began clearing the table without being asked. They worked together with practiced efficiency, each knowing their role in the post-dinner routine. Marcus watched, fascinated by the family dynamic that had developed in his absence. Can Marcus see our rooms? Tommy asked as he carried plates to the kitchen. I want to show him my shark book collection. Grace looked at Marcus questioningly. If you have time, she said carefully. Marcus realized that Grace was giving him an out, a chance to leave before things became more complicated. But he found himself curious about these children's lives, about how they'd turned his empty mansion into a real home. I'd love to see your rooms, Marcus said. The children's excitement was immediate and infectious. They raced upstairs, calling for him to hurry and follow. Marcus found himself climbing the grand staircase with more anticipation than he'd felt in years, eager to see how his children had made this space their own. Tommy's room had been Marcus's old study. The heavy wooden furniture and leather-bound books were gone, replaced with a twin bed covered in shark-themed bedding, bookshelves lined with adventure novels and science texts, and a desk where homework was clearly taken seriously. The walls were covered with pictures of marine life and certificates from school recognizing Tommy's academic achievements. Grace helped me paint the walls blue like the ocean, Tommy explained proudly. And look at this. He pulled a thick book from his shelf, its pages filled with detailed drawings and facts about different shark species. Grace got this for me when I made honor roll last semester. David's room had been a guest bedroom that Marcus barely remembered. Now it was a cheerful space filled with art supplies, math workbooks, and a collection of cooking magazines that David apparently studied with the same intensity other children devoted to comic books. A small easel held a painting in progress, a colorful landscape that showed real artistic talent. Sarah's room had been converted for what Marcus remembered as a small office space. It was now a little girl's paradise with pink and purple decorations, stuffed animals, and a reading corner with cushions and soft lighting. But what caught Marcus's attention was the wall covered with photographs. Pictures of the 3 children at various ages, from babyhood through the present. Birthday parties, school events, trips to the zoo, lazy afternoons in the backyard garden. Grace appeared in many of the photos, but so did other adults Marcus didn't recognize. Teachers, neighbors, friends who had apparently become part of this extended family. These are all the people who love us, Sarah explained matter-of-factly, pointing to different faces in the pictures. Grace says it takes a whole community to raise children properly. Marcus studied the wall of photographs, seeing the life these children had built without him. They hadn't just survived his absence, they'd thrived. Grace had given them stability, education, love, and a sense of belonging that Marcus wasn't sure his own childhood had provided despite all his family's wealth. "Grace," Tommy said as they returned downstairs, "can Marcus come to my soccer game on Saturday? We're playing the championship, and the whole team worked really hard to get there." Grace looked at Marcus with an expression he was beginning to recognize. She was protecting these children, making sure they didn't get hurt by expecting too much from an adult who might disappear from their lives as suddenly as he'd appeared. "Marcus has important business to attend to," Grace said gently. "He travels a lot for work, and he might not be able to stay in town very long." But Marcus found himself saying, "What time is the game? I'd like to be there if I can." The hope that lit up Tommy's face was worth more than any business deal Marcus had ever closed. "Really? You come watch me play? I'd be honored to watch you play," Marcus said, and meant it completely. Later, after the children had been tucked into bed with stories and good-night kisses, Marcus found himself alone with Grace in the living room that had also been transformed during his absence. The formal furniture was gone, replaced with comfortable couches, soft lighting, and evidence of family life. Board games were stacked on a side table, books were scattered on various surfaces, and a basket of clean laundry waited to be folded. "You've done an incredible job with them," Marcus said finally. "They're remarkable children." Grace settled into one of the chairs, looking tired for the first time since he'd arrived. "They're good kids. They've been through a lot, losing both their parents, but they're resilient. Elena raised Tommy well before she died, and Carlos was a wonderful stepfather to all three of them. I'm just trying to continue what they started." Marcus looked around the room that felt more like home than any place he'd lived as an adult. "You've given up your entire life for them." "I've gained a family," Grace corrected. "Elena and I were close, but we were also very different people. She was the spontaneous one, the dreamer. I was always more practical, more cautious. After she died, I realized that I'd been living a safe, but not particularly meaningful life. These children changed that. What happens now?" Marcus asked the question that had been building in his mind throughout the evening. "I mean, legally, practically, what happens now that I know about them?" Grace met his gaze steadily. "That depends on what you want to happen. I won't keep you from them if you want to be part of their lives. But I also won't let them be hurt by promises that aren't kept or expectations that aren't met. They've had enough loss." Marcus understood the warning behind her words. Grace was making it clear that he couldn't treat these children the way he'd treated Elena, making promises he didn't intend to keep, disappearing when business became more important than relationships. "I want to know them," Marcus said quietly. "I want to be their father, not just the man who contributed DNA to their existence. But I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to be the kind of parent they deserve." Grace studied his face for a long moment before responding. "Parenting isn't something you figure out in advance," she said finally. "It's something you learn by doing, by showing up every day and trying to do better than you did the day before. The children don't need you to be perfect. They just need you to be present." Present. Such a simple word, but Marcus realized it was something he never really learned how to be. His entire adult life had been about the next deal, the next opportunity, the next challenge to conquer. He'd never simply existed in a moment, appreciating it for what it was rather than what it might lead to. "Will you help me?" Marcus asked. "Will you teach me how to be their father?" Over the following weeks, Marcus's life underwent a transformation he never could have imagined. He canceled meetings, postponed trips, and delegated responsibilities to his capable team while he learned what it meant to be a father. His assistant, initially bewildered by the sudden change in priorities, quickly adapted to scheduling around soccer practices, parent-teacher conferences, and family dinners. Saturday arrived with a nervous energy that only a championship soccer game could generate. Marcus found himself standing on the sidelines with other parents, many of whom had been watching their children play for years. He was the newcomer, the father who had suddenly appeared after 9 years of absence. But Grace had prepared the way by explaining that Marcus had been overseas for work and was finally able to return home. Tommy played midfielder with the kind of strategic thinking that reminded Marcus of himself in business negotiations. The boy read the field beautifully, anticipating where the ball would go and positioning himself accordingly. When Tommy scored the winning goal in the final minutes of the game, Marcus found himself cheering louder than he'd ever cheered for anything in his adult life. After the game, as the team celebrated with juice boxes and orange slices, Tommy ran to Marcus with his medal, his face glowing with pride and exhaustion. "Did you see my goal? Did you see how I faked left and then went right?" "It was incredible," Marcus said, accepting the medal when Tommy pressed it into his hands. "You played like a champion." "Grace taught me that strategy," Tommy said proudly. "She said soccer is like chess, but with running. You have to think 3 moves ahead." Marcus looked over at Grace, who was helping Sarah distribute post-game snacks to the team. She caught his eye and smiled, and Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Watching Grace with the children, seeing how naturally she moved between mothering, coaching, teaching, and supporting, Marcus began to understand that love wasn't just a feeling. It was a series of actions, repeated consistently over time until they became as natural as breathing. The following Monday brought Marcus's first parent-teacher conference. He sat in a tiny plastic chair next to Grace, feeling ridiculous but determined to take this responsibility seriously. Mrs. Patterson, Tommy's teacher, spread out samples of his work on her desk with obvious pride. "Tommy is one of our most gifted students," she explained. "His reading comprehension is exceptional, and his writing shows real creativity and depth. But what really sets him apart is his kindness to other children. He's a natural leader who uses his abilities to help his classmates rather than to show off." Marcus studied his son's schoolwork, seeing evidence of a curious mind and a generous heart. One essay, titled "My Family," brought unexpected tears to his eyes. Tommy had written about Grace, David, and Sarah with deep affection, but he'd also included a paragraph about his father who travels the world helping people with their businesses and will come home when his work is finished. The faith in that simple sentence humbled Marcus completely. Tommy had spent his entire life believing that his father would return, that the absence was temporary and purposeful rather than neglectful. Grace had somehow managed to keep Marcus alive in his son's heart without creating resentment about his absence. "Tommy has mentioned that his father has returned from overseas," Mrs. Patterson said carefully. "We're so glad you're able to be more involved in his education now. Tommy has been asking if you might be able to help with our upcoming science fair project." "What kind of project?" Marcus asked. "Each student chooses a scientific concept to research and present. Tommy wants to study ocean currents and their effect on marine life. It's quite ambitious for a 4th grader, but he's convinced he can handle it with the right support." Marcus felt a surge of pride at his son's ambition. "I'd be honored to help him with his project." As they walked to the car after the conference, Grace was unusually quiet. Finally, Marcus asked what was bothering her. "Mrs. Patterson thinks you're back from a long business trip," Grace said carefully. "The children's friends and neighbors think the same thing. Everyone assumes you've been a part of their lives all along, just absent due to work obligations." Marcus understood the implication. "You've been protecting me, making sure people don't know I abandoned them." "I've been protecting the children," Grace corrected. "They don't need to carry the shame of having a father who didn't want them. It's better for everyone if the story is that work kept you away, not that you didn't know they existed." The generosity of this gift struck Marcus deeply. Grace could have easily painted him as the villain in this story, the wealthy man who ignored his responsibilities and left others to clean up his mess. Instead, she'd chosen to protect his reputation and his relationship with his children, even though he'd done nothing to earn such consideration. That evening, Marcus found himself in Tommy's room, spread out on the floor with books about ocean currents, marine biology, and climate science. Working on the science fair project together became a nightly ritual that both father and son looked forward to. Marcus discovered that explaining complex concepts to a 9-year-old forced him to understand them more clearly himself. "Dad," Tommy said one evening as they worked on building a model to demonstrate how temperature differences create ocean currents, "Grace told me that you're really rich. Like billionaire rich." Marcus paused in his measurements, unsure how to respond. "Yes, I have been very successful in business." "Does that mean we could have anything we wanted? Like video games and expensive toys and stuff?" Marcus looked at his son's serious face, recognizing that this was a more important conversation than it might appear. "We could afford those things, yes. Does that matter to you?" Tommy considered the question with the thoughtfulness that Marcus was learning was characteristic of all three children. "Grace always says that money is a tool, not a goal. She says the question isn't whether you can afford something, but whether having it would make you a better person or help you help other people." The wisdom in this simple statement amazed Marcus. "What do you think about that?" "I think Grace is really smart," Tommy said matter-of-factly. "We have everything we need already. This house, good food, books to read, a garden to play in, and people who love us. If I had more stuff, I'd just have to keep track of more stuff." Marcus realized that his 9-year-old son had just articulated a philosophy of life that Marcus himself was only beginning to understand. The relentless pursuit of more that had driven Marcus's adult life suddenly seemed not just misguided, but actively harmful. These children, raised by Grace with careful attention to values over valuables, had learned something that Marcus's expensive education had never taught him. David's parent-teacher conference the next day revealed another remarkable child. His second-grade teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, showed them David's math work with amazement. "David is working at a 5th-grade level in mathematics," she explained. "But, more importantly, he's become our classroom helper. When other students struggle with math concepts, David has a gift for explaining things in ways that make sense to them. He's patient and encouraging, never making anyone feel stupid for not understanding something right away." During their car ride home, Marcus asked David about his love of mathematics. "What do you like about numbers?" David's face lit up with enthusiasm. "Numbers are honest," he said simply. 2 plus 2 always equals 4. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, if you're having a good day or a bad day. Math doesn't lie or change its mind. But also, you can use math to create beautiful things, like when Grace and I figure out the perfect amounts of ingredients for baking, or when we calculate how much space each plant needs in the garden. Marcus found himself envious of David's pure relationship with learning. In Marcus's world, knowledge was power, information was advantage, education was competition. But David saw learning as creation, as a way to build beautiful and useful things in the world. Sarah's parent-teacher conference completed the picture of 3 extraordinary children. Mrs. Kim, her 1st-grade teacher, could barely contain her enthusiasm. "Sarah is reading at a 3rd-grade level, but her comprehension is even more advanced," she explained. "More importantly, she has an incredible emotional intelligence. When other children are upset or struggling, Sarah seems to know exactly what to say or do to help them feel better. She's like a little counselor." Marcus watched Sarah color quietly in the corner while the adults talked, noticing how she periodically checked on a classmate's younger brother who was waiting with his mother. Sarah had given the little boy one of her crayons and was patiently showing him how to stay inside the lines, offering gentle encouragement when he grew frustrated. "Sarah has mentioned that she wants to be a veterinarian," Mrs. Kim continued. "She says she wants to help animals who are hurt or scared, because she knows what it feels like to lose people you love, and she doesn't want animals to feel that way." The simple statement broke Marcus's heart. His 6-year-old daughter had processed her own trauma by developing empathy for others who might be suffering. Instead of becoming bitter or self-centered after losing her parents, Sarah had become more generous and caring. Driving home from Sarah's conference, Marcus found himself overwhelmed by the realization of what Grace had accomplished. She'd taken 3 children who had experienced profound loss and helped them transform that pain into strength, wisdom, and compassion. She'd raised them to be not just successful students, but remarkable human beings. "Grace," Marcus said as they pulled into the driveway of the house that was finally beginning to feel like home, "I need to ask you something important." Grace turned to look at him, her expression open but cautious. "What is it? Will you marry me?" The words hung in the air between them, surprising Marcus almost as much as they clearly surprised Grace. He hadn't planned to propose, hadn't thought through the implications, or prepared a romantic speech. But sitting there after a day of learning about his children's character and achievements, Marcus realized that he didn't just want to be their father. He wanted Grace to be his partner in raising them. He wanted to build a real family together. "Marcus," Grace said carefully, "that's not a decision to make quickly or lightly." 6 months later, Marcus stood in the backyard garden that had become the heart of their home, watching his children help Grace prepare for their wedding ceremony. It wasn't the elaborate affair his first wedding had been, with hundreds of guests and professional planners managing every detail. Instead, it was exactly what this family needed: intimate, authentic, and focused on the people who mattered most. Tommy had insisted on growing the flowers for Grace's bouquet himself, tending a special section of the garden with the same dedication he brought to his schoolwork. David had worked with Grace to plan the reception menu, creating dishes that reflected their family's journey together. Sarah had appointed herself the official wedding coordinator, taking her responsibilities with the seriousness that only a 6-year-old could bring to such an important task. "Dad, you need to stand straighter," Sarah instructed as she adjusted Marcus's tie for the third time. "Grace says a wedding is when two people promise to take care of each other forever, so you have to look like someone who keeps promises." Marcus knelt down to Sarah's eye level, struck once again by the wisdom that came from children who had learned early that promises were precious things. "Do I look like someone who keeps promises now?" Sarah studied his face with careful consideration before nodding approvingly. "Yes, but you have to remember to stand up straight during the ceremony so everyone else knows too." The guest list was small but meaningful. Grace's fellow teachers and close friends, neighbors who had become part of their extended family, Tommy's soccer teammates and their parents, and a few of Marcus's business associates who had become genuine friends over the years. Marcus's parents had flown in from their retirement home in Florida, still bewildered by their son's sudden transformation from workaholic bachelor to devoted family man, but clearly charmed by their new grandchildren. Dr. Williams, the minister from the local community church that Grace and the children attended, had agreed to perform the ceremony. Marcus had never been particularly religious, but watching Grace's faith provide strength and guidance for their family had opened him to possibilities he'd never considered. The children's bedtime prayers now included gratitude for things Marcus had once taken for granted: health, safety, family, and enough food to share with others. As guests gathered in the garden, Marcus felt a calm he'd never experienced before any major event in his life. Usually, important occasions filled him with nervous energy and the need to control every variable. But this wedding felt less like a performance and more like a celebration of something that had already begun months ago when he'd first walked into his own kitchen and discovered the family he'd never known he needed. Grace appeared at the edge of the garden wearing a simple but elegant dress the color of cream, her hair adorned with the flowers Tommy had grown especially for this day. She carried herself with the same quiet strength that had drawn Marcus to her from that first evening. But now there was also a joy in her expression that transformed her entire face. Tommy walked beside her, having requested the honor of escorting Grace down the aisle. He should be the one to give her away, Tommy had explained seriously, because he's the one who took care of her the longest. Marcus had been moved by his son's logic and touched by the gesture of respect it represented. David and Sarah scattered flower petals ahead of Grace, and Tommy, taking their roles as flower children with appropriate solemnity mixed with barely contained excitement. David had practiced his petal-scattering technique for weeks, while Sarah had appointed herself the guardian of the backup flower basket in case of emergencies. As Grace reached Marcus's side, She smiled with the same warmth that had made this house feel like home from the very beginning. "Are you ready for this?" she whispered. "I've been ready since the night you agreed to teach me how to be their father," Marcus whispered back. Dr. Williams began the ceremony with words about the nature of family and commitment, speaking not just to Marcus and Grace, but to the children who had gathered close around them. "Marriage is a promise made in front of witnesses," he said, "but family is a choice made every single day. Today we celebrate not just the beginning of Marcus and Grace's marriage, but the continuation of the family they've been building together for months." When it came time for vows, Marcus spoke first, looking not just at Grace, but at the three children who had changed his understanding of what mattered in life. "Grace, when I walked into this house 6 months ago, I thought I was coming home to an empty building. Instead, I found a family I didn't know I had, and a woman who had given everything to protect and nurture the most precious parts of my life. You didn't just raise my children, you saved them. You didn't just manage my household, you created a home. You didn't just love them in my absence, you kept my place at the table until I was wise enough to claim it." Marcus paused, looking at Tommy's serious face, David's encouraging smile, and Sarah's rapt attention. "I promise to love you not just as my wife, but as my partner in raising these remarkable children. I promise to support your dreams and celebrate your achievements. I promise to be present not just in the big moments, but in ordinary Tuesday afternoons that make up a real life. And I promise that our family will always come first, no matter what opportunities or challenges might try to distract me from what really matters." Grace's vows were characteristically thoughtful and grounded in the practical realities of the life they were building together. "Marcus, 6 months ago you asked me to teach you how to be a father, and instead you taught me something I never understood about partnership. You showed me that strength isn't always about being self-sufficient, and that wisdom sometimes means admitting when you need help. You've brought stability and security to our family, but more importantly, you've brought your whole heart." Grace reached out to include the children in her words. "Tommy, David, Sarah, you've been my teachers and my inspiration. You've shown me that family isn't just about blood relations, but about the people who choose to love and support each other through everything life brings. Today, I'm not just marrying your father. I'm promising to continue being the mother you've allowed me to become. I promise to love this family with everything I have, to build a home where everyone feels safe to grow and dream and make mistakes. I promise to support each of you in becoming the best version of yourselves, and I promise that our dinner table will always have room for one more person who needs a place to belong." When Dr. Williams asked if anyone had rings to exchange, Sarah stepped forward importantly, carrying a small silk pillow with 2 simple gold bands. "I picked these out," she announced to the assembled guests. "They're not fancy, but Grace says the best things are simple and strong." The rings were indeed simple, but Marcus had made sure they were engraved with words that captured what this family meant to him. Grace's ring was inscribed with "Home is wherever you are." His own carried the phrase "family first, always." As they exchanged rings, Tommy suddenly spoke up. "Can we do a family promise too?" Dr. Williams looked confused, but Grace smiled and nodded to Tommy. "What did you have in mind?" Tommy looked at David and Sarah, and Marcus realized the children had been planning something together. They joined hands in a circle around Marcus and Grace, and Tommy spoke for all 3 of them. "We promise to be a real family, not just people who live in the same house, but people who take care of each other and tell the truth and forgive each other when we make mistakes. We promise to help with chores and homework and to remember that we're a team. And we promise that even when we grow up and have families of our own, we'll always be each other's family first." David added solemnly, "And we promise to teach Dad about being a regular person, not just a business person." Sarah concluded with, "And we promise that Sunday dinners are family time, no phones or computers or work stuff allowed." Marcus found himself laughing through tears he hadn't expected. "Those are excellent promises," he said. "I accept them all." When Dr. Williams pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss Marcus and Grace shared was sweet and full of promise, but it was quickly interrupted by three children who insisted on family hugs being part of the official ceremony. The reception that followed was everything Marcus's previous wedding celebration hadn't been. Instead of formal speeches and choreographed entertainment, there was David's carefully prepared food, music from a playlist the children had created, and games that included everyone from Marcus's 70-year-old parents to Sarah's 6-year-old best friend from school. Marcus found himself playing soccer with Tommy and his teammates, helping David serve food to guests, and participating in Sarah's elaborate treasure hunt that she designed specifically for the wedding reception. At one point, he looked up to see Grace watching him with obvious happiness as he carried a sleeping neighbor child whose parents were helping clean up. Having second thoughts, Grace asked as she joined him. "Only about waiting so long to find you," Marcus said. "I keep thinking about all the dinners I missed, all the bedtime stories I wasn't here to read, all the soccer games and school plays, and ordinary moments that I can't get back." Grace took his hand, her wedding ring catching the light from the garden lanterns Tommy had helped hang that morning. "You can't change the past, but you get to create the future. And based on what I've seen over the past 6 months, it's going to be a beautiful future." Later that evening, after the guests had gone home, and the children were finally in bed despite their excitement about the day, Marcus and Grace sat in the living room that had become the center of their family life. The house felt different now. Officially theirs together rather than his property that they were borrowing. "I need to tell you something," Marcus said, pulling out a folder of legal documents he'd been carrying all day. "I had my lawyers draw up papers transferring ownership of this house to all of us. The deed now shows Tommy Wellington, David Martinez Wellington, Sarah Martinez Wellington, and Grace Martinez Wellington as equal owners." Grace stared at him in surprise. "Marcus, this house is worth millions of dollars. This house is worth exactly what the people living in it make it worth," Marcus said. "Without you and the children, it was just an expensive, empty building. With you, it's home. I want all of you to know that this is your house legally as well as emotionally. No one can ever take it away from you." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "You realize that legally, I could have claimed common law marriage rights or sued for child support once you knew about the children. I never had any intention of doing that, but you've just made yourself incredibly vulnerable financially." Marcus smiled. "Grace, I've made billion-dollar deals based on handshake agreements with people I'd known for less than an hour. I think I can trust my wife and children with shared ownership of our family home. What about your business empire? Your international responsibilities? My business will continue to be successful. I've learned that good leadership means building systems that don't depend entirely on your constant presence. I've promoted key people, delegated major responsibilities, and restructured my role to focus on strategic decisions rather than daily management. I can do that work from here, with occasional travel when absolutely necessary." Marcus took Grace's hand, feeling the weight of her new wedding ring. "I spent years building a financial empire, but I never understood what wealth actually meant until I walked into this kitchen and found my family. The children this life we're creating together. This is the most valuable thing I've ever owned." "We're not something you own," Grace said with gentle humor. "You're right," Marcus corrected himself. "This is the most valuable thing I've ever been part of." 6 months earlier, Marcus had been a successful but isolated man who measured his worth in dollars and deals. Now he was a husband and father who measured his worth in bedtime stories, soccer games, homework help, and family dinners around a table where everyone had a voice and everyone belonged. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Learning to balance work demands with family responsibilities required constant adjustment. There were mornings when urgent business calls interrupted breakfast routines, and evenings when school projects took precedence over conference calls with international partners. But each choice to prioritize family over business had felt easier than the last, as if Marcus was finally living according to values he'd always carried but never acknowledged. Tommy's science fair project on ocean currents had won first place in his grade level. earning him a spot in the regional competition. David's cooking experiments had progressed from simple recipes with grace to creating original dishes that impressed even Marcus's sophisticated palate. Sarah had started a neighborhood club for younger children, teaching them to read and organizing charity drives for the local animal shelter. Watching his children grow and thrive under Grace's continued guidance while learning to trust him as their father had given Marcus a sense of accomplishment that no business success had ever matched. These children, who had learned early in life that love was something you demonstrated through consistent actions rather than grand gestures, had taught him that the most important work he would ever do was showing up for the people who mattered most. As Marcus and Grace prepared for bed in the master suite that was now truly theirs together, Marcus reflected on how completely his definition of success had changed. 6 months ago, he would have said that success meant being the wealthiest person in the room. Now he understood that success meant being surrounded by people who loved him not for what he could provide, but for who he was becoming with their help. "What are you thinking about?" Grace asked as she turned off the bedside lamp. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am that you decided not to call the police when you found a stranger in your kitchen," Marcus said. Grace laughed softly. "It was your kitchen, technically." "No," Marcus said firmly. "It became my kitchen the day you and the children made it a place where a family could grow. Everything good in my life started the moment you looked up from cutting vegetables and decided to give me a chance to learn how to be their father. And everything good in our lives got better the moment you decided to stay for dinner," Grace replied. Outside their bedroom window, the garden that Tommy, David, and Sarah had helped plant was growing in the moonlight. Inside the house that had once been a showcase was now filled with the comfortable sounds of a family at rest. And Marcus Wellington, who had once thought that coming home meant returning to an empty mansion, finally understood that home was wherever the people you loved were waiting for you at the end of each day. In the morning, there would be breakfast to prepare, children to get ready for school, work calls to manage, and the 1,000 small tasks that made up family life. But tonight, for the first time in his adult life, Marcus fell asleep knowing that he was exactly where he belonged, surrounded by the family he'd found when he finally learned that the most important journey wasn't to the next business opportunity, but back to the place where love was waiting for him to be wise enough to recognize it. "I'm not making it quickly," Marcus said, though he realized that wasn't entirely true. "I'm making it based on watching you with the children, seeing the kind of person you are, understanding that you've already given them everything I should have given them years ago. I want to spend the rest of my life learning from you how to be the kind of man they deserve as a father." Grace studied his face for a long moment. "What about your business? Your travel schedule? The life you've built?" "My business will continue to be successful with or without my constant attention. I have excellent people working for me. But these children, this family, this is something I can't delegate to anyone else. This is something I have to do myself." "And what about love?" Grace asked quietly. "Marriage should be about more than shared responsibility for children." Marcus realized that this was the most important question and the one he was least prepared to answer with business logic or practical reasoning. "I don't know if what I feel for you is love yet," he said honestly. "But I know that I respect you more than anyone I've ever met. I know that I admire your strength and your wisdom and your kindness. I know that when I think about the future, I can't imagine it without you in it. Maybe that's not the same as the kind of love people write songs about, but maybe it's the kind of love that lasts." Grace smiled, the same unguarded expression Marcus had seen that first night when she'd agreed to help him learn how to be a father. "Marcus Wellington," she said, "I think that might be the second smartest business proposition you've ever made." Grace smiled, the first completely unguarded expression he'd seen from her since arriving at the house. "Marcus Wellington, I think that might be the smartest business proposition you've ever made."